Welcome to the New Books Network.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the Recall This Book. My name is Elizabeth Ferry, and I'm really delighted to be here with my co-host, John Plotz. Hey, John.
Oh, hey, Elizabeth. It's great to be here.
And with George Kalogeris, who's joining us today. George is a poet. He teaches poetry and classics in translation at Suffolk University, and he's the author of several books, including Winthropos, which is recently out with the Louisiana State University Press, and which we'll be hearing from and talking about today. Welcome, George.
Great to be here.
So for today's episode, we've decided that we're going to kind of go back and forth between reading poetry and talking a little bit about it to give as much space to George's wonderful poems as possible. So George, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Winthropos, the title of the book, is from the Greekified name that my immigrant father gave to the town where I grew up. He and his brothers had a little grocery store in the town, and there are a number of poems that are situated in the grocery store. So I'm going to start with one of those poems, and it's called Peponia. Honeydew melons, swelling their shipping crates, kept cool in the damp cellar dark of my father's store. Out of sight, but never so far out of mind, that every so often a crowbar's iron talon couldn't pry open their plywood lids, suspending the nails like fangs. If ripeness is all, it was all in the way. I saw the way my father cradled Peponia, turning them over slowly enough to keep the luminous pallor of their moist complexions fresh, still bright in the long look back through the cellar dark. All in the way he'd never say what he saw, but set them gently back down in their wooden crates. Then every so often, another aura would hover there in the afterglow of a dangling bulb's interrogating glare, which still can make my father's sisters appear, crouching together before a crumbling wall. I mean, in that black and white snapshot my mother kept on her perfumed dresser with its oval mirror, and those open, kerchiefed faces staring back from the open fields late in the 1930s, as if a crowbar angled into the dark will leverage enough to release the fragrant, opulent sheen of those who never cross over the water, but hover near whenever I say Peponia, honeydew melons swelling their shipping crates.
Yeah, thanks, George. Is it okay if we put the poems themselves up on our page so that listeners can
Sure,
read?
that would be great.
I think that'd be great
Wonderful.
too, because it was just fantastic to be reading along with you and hearing how you managed that amazing enjambment, those line breaks where the meaning kind of falls over from one line to the next.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of lines I wanted to talk about and hear you talk about. I mean, in the first place, just having the first line and the last line be the same gives this kind of rounded quality to the poem, which is
As
all
round
about
as the melons.
Roundedness, yeah. And I mean, I just love the emphasis of the word and the shape of the word, right? I mean, it's clear that this word Peponia is itself so kind of opulent and smooth and round. It reminds me a little bit, I don't know if you guys ever read Eudora Welty's essay in Becoming a Writer about the word moon, and she describes when she sort of discovered she wanted to be a writer, and she felt the word moon like a grape in her mouth. And just reminds me, a lot about that. Can you say a little bit about, because you do this in a number of poems, about choosing a word and making a Greek word, what kind of work the word does in a
Yeah, I
poem
think
like this?
it's a central point in a number of my poems. And I don't know, some words, it was the musical quality, and it's a sort of talismanic power that certain words had. And it was always, you know, in the house where I grew up, it was, you know, the language is moving back and forth between Greek and English, and how those decisions were made, when to use a Greek word, when to use an English word, I think often had to do with the musicality. And I have another poem where, and this is exactly what happened, is I came home from school, and it was the first week of school. I was in the first grade, and I held up a fork and I held up a spoon, and I said, well, why do you call this one spoon and this one pirungi, to my mother? And she, of course, she had no answer to that, but I'm sure it had to do something with in my childhood mind, the piruni had something to do with the prongs, and there was a very musical sound. So I felt that, you know, that the poems could move back and forth between those languages and try to sort of activate an original emotion, which was, in the case of my father, you know, not knowing as a kid much about his history, except that he came from a tiny village in Arcadia, way up in the mountains. And there was a kind of, you know, I knew there was some kind of unspoken trauma about it, like what happened to his mother. How come we never saw her? And you know, I didn't know the Nazis had gotten to that village, but I knew there was something that made him melancholy, but always very tender. And that came, you know, the melons was something that had to be handled so delicately because they bruised easily. And Elizabeth, you used the word rounded, and you know that they're faceless, but they become like the faces of the sisters, and the sisters' faces and the kerchiefs are rounded, and there's an oval mirror, and so there's some kind of echo of imagery, as well as you know, that there's a kind of echo chamber in that word.
Yes, the open kerchiefed faces staring back. Yeah. And maybe even a sense of openness, but there's something secret, or not secret in a kind of stealthy sense, but some reticence also.
Yeah, no, I think reticence is precisely right. My father was very reticent, and there was something secret, or maybe even, you know, there's a kind of one thing I like about this poem is that it out of that darkness there comes this luminousness, and it's mysterious to me as a, you know, recalling it as a kid. But the and I think in some ways that you know, what John mentioned about, you know, seeing the lines on the page, that 10th line, when I get to that 5th stanza, to keep the luminous pallor of their moist, and then line break complexions, you know, suddenly for a second that there's like a face there in fresh, and right there, because it's iambic pentameter, complexions fresh, there's still 3 more beats, still bright in the long look back. And I was particularly happy with that because it brings it back into the cellar dark, but something has been unlocked from those wooden crates, and it's in both the image and the way the meter springs over the line break, I hope, into that.
That's wonderful.
Couplet.
Well, I was just thinking about, like, there's all different writers I admire who are kind of can be where the poetry can be enigmatic on the page, like incredibly visual and present, and yet there's a sense of mystery. And some of those writers, I don't know, I guess I was thinking of Hart Crane for some reason. You just feel like you're always going to be looking, like you're going to keep staring down into the depths, and he's always like one 7-syllable word ahead of you or something. But then William Carlos Williams, I think, I feel like, don't they call him an imagist poet? That I think
Yes.
he's that there is that sense of presence. You've rendered it in the word. In often those are incredibly short poems, and yet there's still something elusive about it. Like that's
right. And it's not the same elusiveness as saying, well, what does the poem mean, or something like that, right?
Right.
Which is
Exactly.
a kind of a non-question.
Can I ask about the word aura in that context, George? Because it's not italicized like Puponia, but because you're kind of primed by Puponia, I didn't read it just as like the ordinary visual. I mean, does it aura? Are you thinking, does aura mean something more than just like the ordinary visual aura, like afterglow or something? Or is it?
Well, I think it's the way that aura is at one side of the line and afterglow is at another.
Yeah.
That they're kind of reflecting off each other.
Yeah.
And there is this sort of the child's first, I think, experience. So whenever those naked bulbs would go off in the dark, there'd still be an aura for a second.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know exactly what the interrogating glare is, but I think as an adult, it takes me into some of the aura is the aura of trauma.
Yeah.
That's in that interrogating glare. It's like an interrogation lamp.
Yeah.
But it's more, at that point, it's more the adult speaker translating what to the child was just a kind of strange, maybe slightly ominous aura.
Yeah.
So it has a range of, I guess it has a range of radiance, you might say.
Yeah.
Through it.
Maybe that's actually a good transition if you were going to read just my imagination.
Yeah.
One of the things I was saying before that I love about that poem is that question of the memory that existed back in the younger you, and then you're returning to it as an older you. And I always think of Charles Dickens's Great Expectations there, where it's like old Pip and young Pip are kind of there together in the voice. Anyway,
I think that the point you're making is, when we get to the end of the poem, that's explicitly what happens, where I hope at the end of the poem you're in both I'm in both places at once. I'm younger and older, and both events are happening. And it also, thanks for mentioning this poem too. Elizabeth had picked out the Puponia, and you picked out this one. And this one allows me to talk about the town as a town. It's not necessarily connected with the Greek world at all.
Yeah.
But it is connected with the very large Jewish community that was there when I was growing up in the Highlands part of town. And there was a poetry bookstore there.
Yeah.
And that's where I really started to start being a serious reader of poetry. And they had a wonderful community. And there was a young guy, a beautiful young guy from that community who was a wonderful playwright. And he was older than me. He was a few years older than me, but he was kind of a star in the senior class, as you'll see in the poem. And well, I'll read the poem and we can talk about it.
And I'm just going to encourage readers who have access to the show notes to look as George reads. I think it's a great, to have that double effect if you can.
Just my imagination. I was back in Winthrop, driving through the town where I grew up. The radio's off, but passing by the brand new high school, its vintage Motown comes blaring through the Bose speakers in Neil Shapiro's yellow Camaro. The top is down. It's 1971. We're cruising the beach. The Great Temptations are singing as if they could drown in the waves of what keeps running away with them. I love the way they stretch out the crucial noun, imagination. The girls on their towels are lying face up or face down. Their skin is golden brown. Neil is the president of the senior class, as well as the drama club. The sun is a crown on his wavy, luxuriant hair. Not one of our classmates is yet a shade in their underworld cap and gown. As beauty walks by and he sings, I hear a tender rhapsody, but in, now slowing down, reality, she doesn't even know me. Then speeding up to flee, her laughing frown. But no fleeing my yellow fibrosis, mellifluous term for the terminal cancer that never made a sound as it pulsed to the tribal beat of his chosen blood. And now there's no one around except the renowned Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, intoning their syrupy scolding, tears of a clown they call Pagliacci. And Jeannie O'Neill, as white as a ghost, as he waits for the vials to fill. The town conducting a blood drive. The need for Ashkenazi Jews. The Mayo Clinic. The music of Motown. The reel-to-reel cassette, not yet obsolete. The canvas top on the yellow Camaro is down. We're passing the Neil Shapiro Center for the Performing Arts. He's Emerson College bound.
Yeah. I was starting to sort of try to formulate a question about whether this is kind of the power of poetry to do this, to pull things together, or whether it's just that this is what we all live in. We live in memory. We live in, we walk down a street and we think about, the people who we used to walk down with it. I was just visiting my parents and I still realized, I still call the house 2 doors down, Mrs. Walker's house, even though, she's been dead since 1982. And so I guess it's a question. I was going to ask you the question, George, is kind of like poetry versus, the reality of memory, but you were mentioning the music, and in a way, the lyric quality of the music is what kind of cuts between those things, right? Because music is always like that it just brings you back.
Yeah, and it's, it has that, sort of freezes it preserves the moment in amber. And for that reason, I think it also has within it, it also speaks to the passage of time and the sorrow that's there. There's a great moment in the Odyssey where Odysseus's son Telemachus finds his father has not come home in 20 years, and he finds he gets to the palace of Menelaus, and Menelaus is there with Helen, and Helen brings in a bowl of wine that she spikes with a magic potion that comes from Egypt. And it allows them to talk about the past without weeping. And earlier in the Odyssey, Telemachus's mother is walking down the steps and she hears the bard playing a song. And she says, tell him to stop playing that song. It's too sad. I can't bear the song. It brings back too many memories. So that I think poetry both, it has both of those instincts going, that the song is going to bring back the sorrow, and it's something that instinctively is painful, and the verse is going to cut both ways, I hope, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But George, can I follow up with that then? So does it mean for you, for your own poetic practice, does it have to be your stories, your past, your memory that are kind of that crystal around which the feeling can congeal? Because like the example of the Odyssey is such a great one to think with, because I feel like the sorrow of Helen is so real for all of us, even though we don't even think she existed, but we still feel it. But there's a poetic practice that's all about imagined people whose the poet can make those lives and those crystals come alive. But your poetry, in this book at least, is so wound up in your own, like the original, the ground level is your own stories, your own past.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting way to think about it. I mean, I think that I try, because I have, this wonderful resource, which is the Greek, and it leads immediately to the classical past or to the ancient past, then I always try to have, try not to exploit that, but to find ways in which it has some kind of intertwined way of unfolding with my own experience. I don't want to use it simply as a metaphor or simply as a way of enriching or embellishing. In my previous book, there was quite a bit of material on Pausanias, who was a second century Common Era prose writer who wrote this terrific, multi-volume compilation of his walking around Greece. And because he spent a lot of time in Arcadia and Sparta, which is my parents' regions, I felt I could, connect that with stories I heard from them. And that was a way of I think, keeping it from being a kind of, which can be beautifully done. I mean, there's plenty of classical poems that are simply about those Helen and those figures from the Odyssey. But I thought I had a resource here that was rich and that I could connect it to my own life. And it would be the modern Greek world that activated Greek American world.
Yeah.
It gives what you're saying now gives an interesting angle on the title of the poem, right? Which is from the Temptation song, obviously.
Wonderful point. Yeah, that's terrific.
But, the sort of way in which the poem is your imagination running away with you. And that's the only place where Neil Shapiro can drive his Camaro, and also this Neil Shapiro Center for the Arts can be together, right?
That's beautiful. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a beautiful insight, Elizabeth. And I just thinking about how, this poem doesn't have anything Greek about it, but Neil is kind of a Greek hero. I mean, he's kind of like a young Achilles. I mean, he's beautiful. And I think it's kind of humorous in a way. He's not only the president of the senior class, but he's the president of the drama club too. And his life is, he's sort of enacting that as I'm riding in his car with him. And the sun
is a crown on his wavy, luxuriant
hair. He's like he's crowned, like he has a laurel wreath but which is all, dangerous in the Greek world because he's too bright in a way. And the gods never liked that.
Right.
So
I'll just tell you guys a little bit what I'm wrestling with here is that I'm, because I'm mostly a fiction person, not a poetry person. And nowadays there's this really interesting, I don't know if it's a debate going on, but a kind of tussle about what people call autofiction, or the way in which, the fiction that comes out of what is transparently the writer's life. And so then there's people get on different sides of the battle lines about whether you're supposed to be writing fiction about you, or whether you're supposed to be making up. And I realize you guys are just helping me realize how different that is on the lyric poetry side, because it's not as if, George, it's not as if you're just holding up a mirror here to your own, to your own interior. You're doing something where, you're getting at these sorrows of the world, or the ways that the past comes back at us. But it almost seems as if it has to be rooted through your own experiences. Otherwise, what would you have? How could you ground those feelings if you didn't ground them in, things that triggered your own emotions?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. I think that gets you back to the source of your own feeling.
But also that those feelings have a universality to them also, right?
Yes. yeah, I always loved that Yeats said something to the effect that, the private was deeper than the personal. And
Yeah.
that if he got down to the private, he could hit a common root that everyone felt,
Yeah.
at the root of a great tree.
But I was going to ask, George, as we sort of, take the turn and head for home, can you talk a little bit about how this book fits with your earlier books? Like, do you see it, is it continuous with them? Do you see yourself tackling something new or different? How do you?
No, it's a great question. I do see it continuous, because the other book was Guide to Greece, and it was, I think, had more classical material because of Pausanias. And I think it had material that I sort of felt like I was laying a groundwork. And Winthropos was, and the other book, as I mentioned before about Pausanias, he traveled all over Greece, different provinces. And this book is like about a single province, but it's my town, Winthropos.
Yeah.
And so then I think that there's, I thought of this as a trilogy. I thought of this back when I was writing Guide to Greece, that there could be one more that, unlike Winthropos, which is mainly focused on the town, that it spreads out, the word that comes to my mind is Magna Graecia, which is the kind of diaspora, the greater Greece. It doesn't mean anything, there's nothing heightened about the Magna. It's just a spreading. But if the book could spread even further, maybe, into my memory, as well as into other places, but there would be a third one that didn't have either of those two kind of groundings in them.
I always thought that Magna Graecia specifically meant the southern Italian settlements. It means
it does. No, it does. It does mean that, but it comes to, I think for the Greek experience, it comes to mean the other diasporic,
that's fascinating.
Travels and at least I think in terms of the imagination. My way of thinking about
that's a great title, because there's so many Irish words for that too. You get West Ireland, or that way of expressing that Irishness isn't really located in Ireland anymore.
That dislocating it more. I think locating is there's no locus, is all at different places.
It's sort of a diasporic imagination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's great.
Maybe if I could read one more,
please.
And I wanted to read it in dedication to Elizabeth's father, David, who has been such a great friend and mentor to me, and is a master poet, and really our greatest practitioner of iambic pentameter poetry, and almost all the ones that I read are iambic pentameter. But I've talked to him quite a bit about this poem, and he asked me if I would read it. And it's not connected to any of the kind of ideas we talked about before, but maybe it is connected to all of them in some bigger way. Birds in cemeteries. It must be the shade that draws them, or else the grass. And it seems they always alight away from their flocks, alone. It's so quiet here. You can't help but hear their talons clink as they hop from headstone to headstone. Their sharp, inquisitive beaks cast quizzical glances. The lawn is mown. The gate is always open. The names engraved on the stones and the uplifting words below the names are lapidary as ever, but almost never even a chirp from the birds, let alone a wild shriek as they perch on a tomb. And then they fly away, looking as if they couldn't remember why it was they came. But we're doing what our souls are supposed to do on the day we die, if the birds could read the words. And this is the last poem in the book. And one of the connections with David, if I could say this for a minute, is those lines, the lawn is mown, the gate is always open. And in David's great translation of the Aeneid, which is really his own great long poem in English, there are some lines about where Anchises tells Aeneas that, the lines appear anyway in the underworld. I don't recall if Anchises says it or the Sibyl, but that the way down to hell is easy. It's getting back out. That's the difficult thing. So the gate, there's gates that are always open in the cemetery.
I also hear him in towards the end of the poem. Then they fly away looking as if they couldn't remember why it was they came. But we're doing what our souls are supposed to do on the day we die, if the birds could read the words. That kind of colloquialism.
Yes.
Right? And also I, without being a scholar of epic, looking as if to me feels like a sort of a moment, like as in an epic where you say, the epic simile is about to begin.
Yeah, the simile. Yeah, and no, exactly, right? Exactly right. That simile, and the way David can do it with those commonplace phrases, those colloquialisms that keep it an American poem. And these birds are, they're flying to heaven, like our souls are supposed to fly to heaven, which is some of the uplifting words on the tombs are saying.
Right, but at the same time, it feels like a very Kalogeris poem.
Oh, thanks.
As well.
There's also there's something about the rhythm of it too, and maybe the ordinary language quality. It actually reminds me of Seamus Heaney, and I don't know if you have anything to say to that, George. But I was thinking of that poem Bogland, which is also a poem with a lot of magnitude, since it's about this image of Ireland itself as the wet center is bottomless, but it's very ordinary. Like the sort of phrasing is just like ordinary observation, but there's something about the rhythm of it that sounds like him to me.
Yeah, no, I think he's been a great influence on me too, and certainly he's a tremendous poet, and his work as his sense of being both in a kind of much less educated family than he experienced, and yet using that farm material as well as he uses quite a bit of the classical world as well. So he was very important in that way, and also the way that I think that bogland and the bog people and the pump, the well, the way that ordinary objects become so elemental and what Elizabeth said before, universality. They speak to a wide range of poignant experiences.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So George, I think we'll say goodbye for today, and just thank you so deeply for reading and for giving us the opportunity to talk through the poems together.
Thanks so much. It's been a delight, and what terrific questions and terrific attention.
Yeah. Thank you, George.
So thanks enormously.
Yeah.
No, thanks. Recall this book is the brainchild of John Plotz and Elizabeth Ferry. It's affiliated with Public Books, and under normal times has been recorded and edited in the Media Lab of the Brandeis Library. Our music comes from a song by Eric Chaslow and Barbara Cassidy, Fly Away. Sound editing is by Naomi Cohen, and production assistance, including website design and social media, is done by Miranda Peary. Mark DiLello oversees and advises on all tech matters, and we appreciate the support of Dean Dorothy Hodgson and the Mandel Center for the Humanities at Brandeis. We always want to hear from you with your comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future episodes. You can email us directly, or you can contact us via social media and our website. Finally, if you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to write a review or rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You may be interested in checking out past episodes, including episodes with wonderful poets such as Sean Hill, and a conversation between David Ferry, who's already been invoked, and the poet Roger Reeves. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.